Barrett Sallee, welcome into the game in Tuscaloosa. I hope you're doing well.
Doing great, Ryan. How are you?
Good, good. Very busy week for Alabama since the last time we spoke, and I know you've written about this with Mike Locksley, Alabama coach Nick Saban, playing it safe, smart with new hire Mike Locksley. Let me get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because, you could go outside the box or go, outside the Tuscaloosa walls, but really, why do you need to? The Alabama offense, really, since Lane got there in 2014, is the Alabama offense. It doesn't change. It changes based on personnel, but the idea and the philosophy is now sort of ingrained. We saw that this year with Brian Dable. We saw that, through Lane's 3 years. And Locksley was around, obviously, for the last two and understands this personnel well. And the thing about Alabama is it's a certainty that they're going to back him up with a lot of different resources, a lot of different analysts, a lot of different, people to help him out, some of whom probably need to get their feet back on the ground from a PR perspective. So, but are still really good offensive minds. So, Locksley, throughout his career, he's had some ups, he's had some downs. He led Illinois to a Rose Bowl with Juice Williams, with Ron Zook as their head coach. So, he hadn't been great at times either, but he also hasn't had Alabama's foundation of young players, and he hasn't had Alabama's foundation of a support staff that's second to none in college football. So, it's fine. There's no reason to outthink the room. The obvious choice sometimes is the right choice.
Let me ask you, when you look at this offense, it has a chance to be record-setting. He could ride this thing to becoming a head coach. You could ride this thing for a couple of years with everything that we're expecting. I don't know if we're putting the cart before the horse, but it seems like all the weapons are here for this to be one of those dynamic offensive packages.
Yeah, you saw how, look, Tua, it was awesome in the national championship game. We all know that. He also made some mistakes, so he's going to have to get better because he did make some mistakes, but he was a freshman, and you would expect him to make those mistakes in that setting at times. Hope, if he does, then yeah, they've got obviously a foundation at running back with Damian returning. That's probably the best recruiting get of the offseason for Nick Saban, no matter who signs in February and who's already signed in December. The receivers have been fantastic. We saw obviously Devontae Smith become the subject of what I'm sure will be countless paintings that are sold at Alabama bookstores throughout the state of Alabama. But Jerry Jeudy was good for them throughout the course of the season. Ruggs was as well. So, yeah, it's going to take a lot to screw this up. I don't think Mike Locksley is going to screw this up. And I think there's going to be, like I said, enough help provided to him, both with, offensive staff and then support staff behind those guys, where it's going to be pretty easy steering for that offense.
Barrett, who do you see as the biggest challenger for Alabama in the SEC West in 2018?
I guess it's Auburn, but that's a huge gap. It's a huge gap no matter who you say, to be honest, because, let's just say start with Auburn. Their top end was, their ceiling was as high as anybody's last year, but they lost a lot on that offensive line, and you saw Jarrett Stidham really get happy feet quite a bit when his offensive line helped, let him down. And so, I don't know how good they're going to be, but they're probably the safe bet as the primary threat. Outside of them, maybe Mississippi State can at least be relevant. I don't think they're going to ever be bad. I don't think they have the ceiling of anybody in the SEC West. But they're still going to be a tough out. Alabama saw that this year. And I think Joe Moorhead will do a good job. I don't know about LSU. I think this whole thing with Orgeron and Ensminger is going to just fail miserably. I don't think Texas A&M's there yet. Almost by default, it kind of has to be Auburn, because at least you have some known quantities, like a good defensive coordinator, a quarterback who's somewhat decent, a running game that always seems to find a way to make it work, no matter who the pieces are. So those things are pretty set in stone. But the offensive line issue, I think, makes it a big drop from one Alabama to two Auburn in the West.
You've been asking the question as far as the SEC West, what happens to Jalen Hurts? What do you think happens to Jalen Hurts if you're predicting here towards the end of the January?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily cut and dry that he ever transfers. I mean, you know those guys, and we all saw how they reacted to each other in Atlanta on the field. You know, they're genuinely happy for each other. With that said, they just won a national championship at that time, and the immediate aftermath of that is still sort of resonating. I think Jalen goes through spring practice. I think Tua goes through spring practice. I mean, because you kind of heard the reports that I did before the Sugar Bowl that if Tua doesn't play at some point, he's probably going to look elsewhere. You know, at some point you got to look out for yourself, right? So go through, both of those guys need to go through spring practice, look around, understand where they are. And the one thing that I think Alabama needs to do and its coaches need to do is be honest with these guys, because Alabama's staff has a tendency to let quarterback battles drag out to the start of the season. And then you've got Blake Barnett transferring at the end of September and things like that. They need to be honest with these guys because there's going to be a market for whichever one is not going to be the starting quarterback. And then at the end of spring practice, the loser, which I think at this point, at least the general consensus is that Jalen Hurts probably is going to be the number 2, needs to look around and say, okay, what's the best option? Changing positions, changing schools, or staying here? And you know, there's going to be options for, you know, that make sense for all the above. So I think that's what the smart thing to do is. And at the very worst, you get 15 practices against Alabama's defense in the spring. And that's going to help you as a football player no matter what your future takes you on from there.
Barrett, I want to go back to what you said, and I know I've shared this multiple times, but I do believe, and I think there's other people, Lane Kiffin's been on record, there's been multiple people that have said, if Tua doesn't play in that game, he's out of here. He's gone. I don't even think fans really understand that. Right now, they don't have to. But when you look at just the program overall, that second half, yes, it was a win for a national title, but it was a win because I'd hate to know the discussion that you and I would be having if Alabama would have lost that game, and we're sitting here going, okay, this guy's leaving, this guy's leaving, this guy's leaving, this guy's leaving, this coach is leaving. I can promise you it'd be a lot different interview than you and I are having if that second half doesn't go the way that it did.
Yeah, it'd have been way different because that second half, and look, you know, putting Tua in was a risky proposition in terms of, you know, with the people around him because you had a bunch of freshmen around him. That's a high risk, high reward thing because you've got Najee Harris basically providing pass protection, also running the ball effectively. You got 2 receivers in there, or 3 receivers who are freshmen, a freshman left tackle, and that, you know, if that crashes and burns, which, I mean, look, I mean, I went back and watched that game last week. There were like 7 or 8 different times where like Georgia had to make one play and the whole game could have turned sideways. So, you know, if that doesn't go that way, you're looking at maybe a different landscape in Tuscaloosa. But, you know, it is what it is now. And everybody's happy about the future of the program. Not that they had any real reason to be upset with it before, but, you know, a lot changed in that 30 minutes plus 1 overtime of football.
Bear, we've also been asking the question here locally when we talk about how many more championships is left, because Nick Saban stood at that podium on Saturday, the championship celebration, and said, we're not finished yet. How many do you think, if you're a betting guy, what do you think the number is we talk about championships left for Nick Saban?
I think it's 1 now.
Okay.
I think it's 1 because, like, look, Nick's what? He's 66 or 67?
66.
Right 66. You know, that's getting up there in age. He's a grandfather now, and he's chilled out a little bit. And you know, I know that he can't imagine his life not being part of a team. He always says that. He's always been part of a team, and I get that. But you know, I also think that he understands a little bit more now that there's a lot to life, a lot more to life outside of being a part of that team and a football team. And once his grandkids start doing a lot of things that a lot of kids get to do, and he's not around for some of that stuff, that tends to eat at you. Like it's just natural. So I think he finds 1 more, and then probably rides off into the sunset.
Okay, so he breaks Coach Bryant, that he says, "Thanks, I'm out of here. I'm gone."
Yeah, I mean, and I told you this a couple weeks ago. I thought this was the sort of pivotal year for him in terms of the NFL because the Giants' job was open. I guess technically still is, but there were a lot of teams that, or a lot of situations from the NFL level that, maybe he was interested in, or at least theoretically would make sense for him. And so that came and went. And so I think he's married to the idea of, all right, this is it. But I don't think he works out the duration of his contract. He's got 6 years left on his contract. I don't think he does that.
Barrett, let me ask you, on Saturday we saw a fan who drove 821 miles to celebrate a 54-minute celebration. Right. I mean, okay, 821 miles. Can you think of anything, or would you be willing to do anything for your team? Your team. Would you be willing to drive 821 miles for a less than an hour celebration?
For less than an hour, no. I've been to some of those celebrations just in general. They're pretty formulaic, right? Like, they're fun, but they're formulaic. No way. Like, I'd do that for a game, like if it was like the World Series and the Braves were playing.
Sure, Game 7, right?
And I not to bring up bad memories for myself, but I said last year about this time, hey, if the Super Bowl ticket falls into my lap and I can get to Houston, I'm going to go. Didn't fall into my lap, and I didn't go, but I would have. But for a celebration, no.
Yeah, 821 miles. That may be the best fan in Alabama. There's just 12 hours in a car. That's without stopping. That's 12 hours of solid driving at 821 miles for less than an hour. Oh, and plus you got to get back.
No, thank you.
I mean, it's 821 back.
Did he at least eat somewhere good in Tuscaloosa?
I hope they came for Dreamland or something. Yeah.
I mean, geez. Because those, like I said, those are pretty basic celebrations.
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah. My fan loyalty doesn't really. I mean, like, my best story, like, I'm way on down the list when it talks about driving 821 miles there.
No, thank you. I'll take a hard pass on that one.
Barrett, let me ask you if any thoughts on Dennis Dodd's article with the offense evolution, your colleague there at CBS Sports, and sort of the conversation about offensive numbers. What were your thoughts on that article?
I don't necessarily think it's, numbers are down this year. I don't necessarily think it's a sign. I think it's just a year in which the numbers just happen to be down in terms of offensive production, pace of play. But I think you're going to have, sort of ebbs and flows within this sort of new school of college football where offense still drives the bus, but defenses figure out how to attack it a little bit better. I think this year maybe one of those cases where defenses did figure out how to attack some of these exotic teams a little bit better. And you had a lot of injured quarterbacks out there too, which probably didn't help matter. So no, I don't think it's a trend. I just think it's now, and I've told you this for years. Defense does not win championships anymore. Just enough defense does, and that's a moving target based on a lot of factors, specifically what kind of offense you have and what kind of offense your opponent has. That's not going to change. It just, there might be some ebbs and flows within the new trend.